But my background is I'm a woman living with HIV for about 24-ish years. I was diagnosed through my pregnancy. At the end, once I gave birth, I found out that I was living with HIV. The most common question I do get is, how does your family treat you? Yeah, I get that question a lot because usually those interactions are happening because someone found out that I found out through giving birth. And I really feel like having those conversations with yourself of like, why do I have this aversion to getting tested? What is informing that fear?
This is Birds.Bees.Bodies, the podcast where we strip away the myths and get real about sexual and reproductive health. No shame, no stigma, just truth, guidance, and conversations that matter. Powered by Planned Parenthood of Florida, we're here to break barriers, challenge the silence, and give you the knowledge to take charge of your health and your future. Let's go. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Birds.Bees.Bodies. This is season 5, and I am your host, Michelle Quesada, Vice President of Communications for Planned Parenthood of Florida, brought to you by Planned Parenthood of Florida. And if you haven't already, I'm going to just mention it right now. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast if you enjoy listening to us and listening from all the guests that we have on the podcast. If you want to hear more from them, we invite a lot of people back on, so make sure you subscribe and your whatever platform you're on, whether it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever you're on, make sure you subscribe to us. And I'm excited today to invite 2 guests to talk about today's topic. We have Kamaria, who's going to share a little bit about herself, and we also have Trey, who's part of our mental health program. And I'll let them describe, give some background on themselves in just a second. But I want to dive real quick just to give you all an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we have National HIV Testing Day coming up in June. This is something that we really talk about every single month of the year, but in June specifically, we love to be able to highlight and bring awareness and get more folks tested, more folks aware, have more opportunities to combat the stigma that surrounds HIV, mental health, equity to testing and treatment. And, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is what if one of the biggest barriers to ending HIV isn't medicine or access to medicine? I know there's challenges to that, right? But what if it's stigma? What if it's just getting your foot in the door? What if it's just opening the dialogue? What if it's just opening your mind to the concept of raising awareness, of being there for your community, for supporting your community? So we're going to be taking a closer look at the realities of HIV in Florida, talking about the challenges that go unspoken. We just had a major, wild, chaotic turn earlier this year. I'm sure Kamaria could talk about that, the Florida Drug AIDS Assistance Program, and what happened there with support for folks who receive medication, who are able to access medication. We're going to be talking about the fear of testing, misconceptions about HIV, along with mental health, social isolation, and how we continue to explore all of these barriers, how they impact individuals, families, and communities. But most importantly, we're going to go beyond the statistics and really talk about resilience, experience, and highlight the support systems that are available and how people can thrive. So I'll stop talking right there, and I'll let Kamaria jump in and share a little bit about herself and why. And in a second, I'll tell you why I brought her to this podcast. So Kamaria, go ahead. Welcome.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. This has been, building up to this has been really exciting, of just being able to talk about specifically the successes around the AIDS Drug Assistance Program advocacy. But my background is I'm a woman living with HIV for about 24-ish years. I was diagnosed through my pregnancy. At the end, once I gave birth, I found out that I was living with HIV. My baby was not. Thankful to medications and treatments and things, interventions that are available for mothers who are pregnant with HIV. I currently serve as a co-executive director of the SARA Project, which is a coalition building organization helping to decriminalize HIV. And in between living with it and on the policy side, I do public speaking, awareness, education, and a lot of relationship building, a lot of hallway conversations and water cooler conversations around stigma, and trying to shift people's mindsets and open their hearts to understanding what it's like living with HIV.
Wow, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be talking about, your story, your experiences. I appreciate it so much. And Trey, if you want to share a little bit.
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, Kamaria, thank you for sharing your story. So I'm Trey. I am, as you can see from my name, I'm pronoun indifferent, meaning I don't care what pronouns you use as long as you say them respectfully. I am Planned Parenthood of Florida's Behavioral Health Integration Coordinator. Very long title to say that I tried to get Planned Parenthood, I get our behavioral health department kind of in cahoots with all of our other departments so that we can be trauma informed and we can do whole person care across our entire system. A little history about me and why I'm particularly very passionate about this subject as living with as a gay man. This is always something that I've always heard of. HIV's always been something that has been kind of around the realm of my existence. And also, my first role that got me into being a social worker was working with those newly diagnosed with HIV. And it holds a very near and dear spot to my heart.
Thank you so much, Trey. I appreciate that. And I told you I was going to promise you and share what brought me to Kamaria, how I found Kamaria. So earlier this year, I don't know if you all follow the headlines, that there was a big change with the
Mhm.
Florida AIDS Drug Assistance Program and who is eligible to receive
Yeah.
support through the program. And the federal poverty percentage of folks who are eligible, the eligibility went down from 400% to 130%. So that's
Mm.
thousands of people that just got blocked immediately from being able to access medication, life-saving medication, right? And Kamaria wrote a very heartfelt, thoughtful obituary of herself. Like,
Mm.
you wrote your own obituary. Can you share a little bit about that? Like, what brought you to this point, and what kind of aware? I'm sure you were able to bring a lot of awareness to this topic, because I found it like searching for the impact of this
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah, thank you. I do stuff like that and then I forget. So I was like, oh yeah, I did do that. Um, and today, well, June also holds Long-Term Survivors Day. So it has a double special meaning for me. But at the top of the year, when we started hearing about the AIDS drug assistance program changes that you're referencing, I was already holding this kind of rage around healthcare cuts in general and public health and watching people I love struggle. And anybody who knows me knows I'm a really sensitive person and I have big feelings that I express a lot. And I didn't know what to do with these feelings and they were keeping me from showing up the way I wanted to. And I write a lot and I wrote out of anger, thinking about the beginning of the epidemic around folks who are advocates and activists and ACT UP based in New York. There's several chapters throughout the country, but that's what everybody thinks of. And I always believe in order to go forward with change, you have to know your history. You have to tap into the shoulders that you stand upon, all of that great stuff. And I was like really crying out, like to the people I've lost before, like, what do we do? What do we do? And so I just started writing. And when I looked down, I realized, like, when I looked at it, I realized, like, oh, girl, this is an obituary. Like, this is heavy. Um, I had no intentions of it seeing the light of day. I just needed to channel out my own. But I'm a part of these calls. There's a kind of ad hoc coalition, Save HIV Funding, through Prep for All Access campaign, and they kept talking about different demonstrations and acts of civil disobedience that were happening. And I just kept thinking about the die-ins from the beginning of the epidemic that I saw in documentaries that long-term survivors had told me about. And I know that's not my lane. That's not my ministry. Doing a die-in is just not what I do. And I was like, well, what about pre-obituaries? What about having a mock funeral for public health? Like, rest in peace, public health, because it's slowly diminishing.
Mhm.
And then there was also this level of accountability that I wanted to hold. I wanted to take back the narrative of, if this is what's going to take me out, I'm going to call out every entity, every agency, every person who's responsible, so their name will be known throughout history of being the decision makers or maker, that contributed to not just my life but many other lives being impacted, whether it be in like direct death or not. Um, and so it just kind of snowballed from there. I remember being really delicate and intentional about how I wanted to put it out in public. I knew not to post it straight to Facebook because people they don't always read all the way. And I didn't want to cause alarm, especially my family. I did give a heads up to folks like, hey, I'm putting this out there. It's not a cry for help. I'm not trying to end my life. This is not me being vague booking. This is my protest, is that I'm going to live despite what you all are doing. We're going to fight, and I'm going to call you out. I'm going to make you as uncomfortable as possible until you do something different. That's where my advocacy thrives from, is making those who don't get it uncomfortable until they do. I think there's a level of vulnerability that comes when you're uncomfortable that allows opportunity for education. And I kind of thrive off of creating those spaces. And that's how I kind of pivoted this rage that I was feeling into something that felt more meaningful and helpful for communities. I've gotten mixed reactions. There are a lot of people who were very upset with me for doing it. It was triggering, understandably. Everybody has a different reaction and response to death and grief. And everybody handles it differently, but I felt compelled to remind people how serious HIV and AIDS has been in the past, and how even though we've come so far, when people say we won't go back, I wanted folks to understand exactly what we mean when we say that.
Incredible. Yeah. And just the process that you went through, right? To be able to like put those feelings of rage into something that turned out to be an advocacy, initiative, and your efforts, others' efforts, the headlines, the spotlight. I mean, everything helped into creating emergency funding for this, and this program, not changing drastically in the way it did, even though for 10 weeks, people's lives were impacted and there was real harm done. So I'm happy to report that there is a budget line item in the budget that will save this program and will be able to continue to provide funding. So, you said a lot of things that came up for feelings, mental processes, everything that you go through in finding and knowing that you have HIV, and then being or realizing that you've been cut off from access to care and cut off from the ability to live the rest of your life. Can you talk a little bit, Trey, about like, is that with that process that Kamaria went through, is that a pretty similar process to, folks who find out they have HIV or are about to test because they think they might have been exposed? What does that process go through, and how does that mental process play out?
Yeah, and Kamara, thank you so much for sharing that. I was really engaged. I'm thinking back to reading about when you said chapters in New York, like the ACT Up movement, ACT Out movement, and knowing about their protests where they took over Wall Street and things. And I was putting you right up there with them. But to your question, Michelle, yeah, when you think about this, whether it's getting newly diagnosed, whether it's coming in for testing, and what's recently happened with the shakeup with ADAP, it's uncertainty. It's a lot of unknowns, and our brains don't do well with unknowns. We don't like it. It makes us feel uncomfortable. And this is also something that's so stigmatized. I know we're probably going to use this word a lot today, but it's so stigmatized as both something that's deadly and something that is a disease of morality. It's so looked at as a moral issue along with a health issue that this is a lot of stigma, a lot of unknowns, sometimes even before people even know their status. So what happens in our brain, I don't know about everybody else, but mine comes up with all the worst situations. We start going through all the scenarios, down to what grocery store am I going to use if I can't go to the one that I'm used to going to because people may know. And it comes to a point where it starts to get into every part of your life in a flash of a moment. You start reconsidering all this, which puts people on a lot of uneasy ground. It's a breeding ground for, those anxious symptoms, that nervousness, that worry, which we know is not good for our bodies or our minds.
Yeah, and something that comes to mind to me too is like the overall health of a community, right? Is being self-aware, being responsible, and being educated, right? And like having access. So even though this testing is available, a lot of folks don't have the other parts of it to allow, like it creates a fear and a gap in testing, which then perpetuates the community crisis, right, of not being educated and not receiving the healthcare, the medicine that you need, all the things that contribute to having a healthier community. Can we talk about what needs to be done, or how can community members support? I know there's a lot of orgs that are doing this work, and we're trying to do as much as we can to destigmatize HIV testing, destigmatize prevention methods, protection methods, all the things. And yet there's still this fear and this distance of not wanting to know your HIV status, right? Like not wanting to know, and then also not accepting that this can happen to anyone, right? Because that's the other part too, is like people think, oh, somebody did something to contract HIV. Not necessarily, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. How do we remove HIV from the stigma, and what kind of conversations need to happen? What kind of action needs to be taken in communities, even at the home, talking about it at home, to be able to get people more educated and tested more frequently?
Yeah, so it's the $1 million question, $1 billion question
Right.
of, what do we do? And I always start internally. Like there is like this systemic approach that we need to be taking to dismantling stigma. But when you look at the core of stigma, it comes from like this, like what Trey, what you were saying, like these internal discomforts and fears, and not knowing like how to process them, how to name them, how to articulate them. And I really feel like having those conversations with yourself of like, why do I have this aversion to getting tested? What is informing that fear? And I'm not talking about like, people would assume I'm talking about like go to therapy. Yes, we should maybe, but that's not required. Like sometimes just sitting with yourself or sitting with somebody who's living with HIV and being willing to ask those questions and being open to receiving the responses, but also making sure that whoever you're talking to, like, make sure you're okay with whatever the questions are, because it can be a little triggering and unsettling. But yeah, I don't want to go on and on, but I think it starts internally. And when you start having those conversations and normalizing those conversations, and move at the speed of trust, when you start making those conversations larger, within your own communities, your own networks, everybody's not going to arrive to, I get it at the same time. I think that helps contribute to it. Meanwhile, on the other end, while these organizations and agencies are doing that systemic work, dismantling, I'm a chronic optimist. I believe like in the middle, at one point we'll fuse together and we'll look up and, stigma won't be as prevalent. I think we have made advances in that so far. I call it the residue of stigma, because it's not the same as it was in the 80s. Gosh, even in the early 2000s, I remember I had my own internalized stigmas that I had to work through. Yeah, so that's where I would go with those response with that response of how to kind of start. But I don't know if there's any like one answer for it, but I would love to hear what Trey thinks as well.
It's really funny. I was in here going, well, I don't know what one answer to give. And then Kamari, you were like, there's no one answer. I was like, good, I'm not alone. But it's really funny, Michelle, when you said, because the whole time you were talking, the thought that just kept coming in my mind over and over again was this concept of like, oh, that's not going to happen to me. And it's that concept of like, this doesn't affect me. And kind of into Kamaria, I'm just agreeing with everyone today that it's this internal conversation. It's kind of a combination of the two of, believing that this can't happen to you because this is not something that would affect you. This is because a lot of times it boils down to being something of morality. This is transmitted through sex. So that means that obviously you were having sex, you were doing something that certain people deem immoral. And I think it's taken away from that, there are other ways of contracting,
Mhm.
and then also that everyone who has sex is at risk.
Yeah.
And that's just the truth of the matter. So when people when I did community testing, everyone would go, "Oh, I don't need to be tested. I'm not at risk." I'm like, do you have sex? Yep, you do. Come get tested.
Yeah.
Because that's the truth of the matter.
Mhm.
Mm.
Is there like, do you think that the struggle people face in disclosing their HIV status like feeds into the stigma as well? Like it's like they're afraid of disclosing it because there's stigma, but then them not disclosing it creates more stigma, because if you hear from more people who are living with HIV, then you start to normalize and understand this is a part of healthcare, and there are ways to educate people about what that means.
Yeah, it's such a complicated. I'm sitting here thinking about like recent conversations I've had. Um, I'm super public with my status. Like you can Google me, right? And I don't mean to say that in a conceited way. I'm just saying you can. You can literally Google me.
Literally,
Um,
yeah.
and that information doesn't translate the same way in a one-on-one interaction.
Mhm.
I was just recently with my sister and some folks, and I casually just dropped like, "Yeah, I have HIV," and I forgot what the context was. I just kept talking, and then I realized I stopped talking when I felt everyone looking at me, and I was like, oh, "Jeez." So I kind of just roll my eyes, and I'm like, "Okay, my bad. Let me back up and make everyone else in the room comfortable." And I wasn't having sex with any of these people, so I was like, "Why am I feeling so nervous?" But I was like, "This is another opportunity to kind of put people at ease." Around why I'm just so casual about it. And that's just my style. Like that's just who I am.
Mhm.
And then folks ask questions, and I read body language. I could tell when my answers were maybe a little too honest, and I felt the body language like kind of stiffen. And I was like, all right, we're going to shift over to something else because I don't even remember what we were talking about before we got here, before everybody was looking at me. Um, and so afterwards, my sister like was just like, how do you do that? And I don't really know how to answer it. It's a thing that comes up in me, and I don't think about it. I just educate whenever I can based off of whatever the context is in that moment. Um, I wish people had a better understanding of like how vulnerable you have to be to disclose because of how truly dangerous it can be. Um, there are people who've lost their lives. Like they do what the public health department tells them to do around disclosure. And then because of stigma, ended up not surviving that disclosure. So you have stories like that as well that contribute to it. And I'm still working and like trying to figure out how do we get the snake to stop eating its tail in that kind of societal
Wow. Yeah,
conflict.
That cycle.
it becomes dangerous. Like you know what you have to do, but it also becomes dangerous for you to do so.
Yeah.
How can healthcare providers better address that in not just like physical wellness, but also mental wellness that comes with, a positive diagnosis?
I think a big part of it is I I'm a big proponent of educating everybody. You know, if someone says something in front of me that triggers it, I start educating about HIV. They are not HIV positive. They're not they don't believe they're at risk. I'm still going to give education. And I think having those conversations, if for I like Kabaria's like educating whenever. Um, my husband always laughs that one time in Publix, I was having a conversation in the line about somebody with somebody about HIV, and I was like, I have condoms in my car if you need them, because that's just like the public health part of what I was working. And I think it's a lot of education and coming at things with curiosity and without assumption. Not, I working with newly diagnosed people. I've had some people that, we've had to work with stigma. We've had to work with moving through all these feelings of like guilt and shame and grief. And I've had some clients that are just like, they get their test results. They're like, okay, I'll start taking meds, and they keep moving. And I'm baffled, and I'm like, oh, that's new.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. But It's, I think, not moving with assumptions and moving with curiosity and seeing where that person's at and spreading awareness and education in all settings.
That's really great. And the reason why I ask some of these questions too is because we're trying to normalize routine HIV testing, right? And it's part of what you've all been saying is like, well, a lot of people live in this mindset that it can't happen to me, and yes, it can happen to you. There's so many different ways it can happen to you without you, ever without it being for whatever reason obvious to you that it could happen to you. And I talk about, like free testing, and there's several orgs that provide free testing, several healthcare providers. Planned Parenthood of Florida provides free testing every year around National HIV Testing Day. But the one day a year is a day to raise awareness and to get more people in the door to test, but really it should be a routine test that you get, and it's for your peace of mind, for communication awareness, for communication overall, community health overall. And like you mentioned Trey earlier, it stuck with me when you asked somebody about like, getting tested and they said, no, I don't need to do that. And you said, well, do you have sex? And they said, yeah. I'm like, then you should get tested.
Yeah.
Like how do we do better at being able to normalize HIV testing? Because I know there's the test, like people who come in to get the test, and then there's a fear about getting results, and then all the things that come with that. But just the foot in the door of like, I'm coming to get tested because I know, I've been educated on HIV. I know that it's my responsibility to my community, to my loved ones, to everyone, to get tested, to myself, and changing the narrative. And I think we've done better, at doing this over several decades now. But in the past, HIV was a death sentence, right? And that's not the case anymore. Like you can live a full, complete life. And Kamara, you can share more about your experiences of what that means. But that, that it is a part of your health, but it doesn't define who you are.
For sure. It does not define me. There's many days, because I so casually mention it, I forget. I forget about the stigma. I forget about like the larger society's understanding of HIV and the difference between HIV and AIDS, because that's usually the first question I get asked is, do you have AIDS? And sometimes I'm like, difference doesn't make, like, I understand the difference, but no, I don't. Because people seem to be more alarmed by the word AIDS versus HIV. I remember, sorry.
No, it's okay.
So, take your time.
I remember once when I got married, the provider, my husband and I shared a provider. And I remember how excited she was about U equals U. We've known about this science, this intervention for a really long time, but they were starting to actually use this phrasing. And she was so excited. She wanted my husband and I to try to have a baby. And she's like, you can have a baby. Like I already had a daughter, but my husband and I did not have a child together. And so we, learned everything we needed to learn to be undetectable and to get on we were on the same treatment. And so we tried. Other things happened where we ended up not conceiving. And then my husband, unfortunately, later passed away. But I remember that moment in our marriage, like, was such a beautiful thing, because going into my diagnosis, I never thought I was gonna get married, first and foremost. And I always assumed whoever I married had to be living with HIV. Like I was like, nobody not living with HIV is going to love me. Again, back to this internalized stigma that Trey and I have been talking about. When I met my husband, I found out he was living with HIV, but it wasn't an issue for me because I had done some healing and some growing. And we were both really, really healthy, and being able to have that be a part of my story and still go out in community. Because at this time I was still working in outreach. Like I volunteered to do outreach and testing with different agencies, and being able to share that with folks, because people love to look at you and say, like, you don't look sick, you don't look like you have it, or you look really good.
Or you have to look right, yeah.
And I'm like, what does that mean? But okay, to the point with rapid testing, people didn't believe me, and I probably shouldn't do this because they do cost money. But every so often, I would just swab my mouth really quick. And I'm like, instantly, you're going to see that I'm not lying. Like I do have HIV, and these tests are legit, because some people didn't believe the tests were accurate. So doing little things like that, I did those things to help contribute to, like, this is harmless. This is normal. Like you're going to have a full life as long as you take your treatment. And then adding into that conversation of like, what is a treatment plan like? What does quality of life look like for you? And giving people that autonomy and that agency to be able to name those things while they're navigating whether or not this is going to be a part of their life or not. And even if they're negative, still continuing to do those preventative, those steps like being on PrEP, using condoms, and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And let's talk about that for a second, because like the science has advanced so much, medicine has advanced. There are so many preventable medications for nowadays with PrEP, like, and even overall and STIs in general with DoxyPEP, with everything that's available. And it's we have the power to create more health and more overall wellness in our communities by just letting folks know this is available and there is nothing wrong with taking this. There's nothing wrong with being safe. There's nothing wrong. You know what I mean? Like, live your life and just take the right steps to be safe, to protect yourself, to protect others in your community. Let's talk about that for a second. How do those prevention tools like empower people to be able to live a full life, to not look at the diagnosis, to not look at, feed into the stigma?
I think for a lot of people, it gives freedom. And I think especially when you think about HIV care historically, I mean, there was a decade where the government didn't even acknowledge what was happening. And for them, it gives freedom of like there are actually choices now, and there are ways to protect other people and to protect oneself. And I think all these options, I even think of Cabenuva, the monthly shot, like it just gives a lot of freedom and um, relief to a lot of people in a lot of communities to be able to say, I can be safe. It's not flipping a coin or rolling the dice, however you want to phrase it, but I actually get to have some control over myself, that I'm taking the steps. And that's where the empowerment comes in.
I agree, 100%. I'm reflecting back on like advocating for myself around treatment. It was at the time I was on 3 pills a day. And for many, that wasn't a big deal. Like, there's other regimens that were way more pills, but I knew I was building up a intolerance. Like, I didn't want to, I was struggling to take my meds every day. Um, and it was messing with my mental health. And so I was like, I want to be on the 1 pill regimen. And at the time, I don't remember what insurance I had. I think at this time I didn't have insurance. So that was an issue. And folks weren't wanting to give me what I wanted. And I was like, I'm not leaving here today unless you give me a 30-day supply of whatever the treatment was that I wanted. Because that's what it was. My husband had switched, and I was frustrated. I was like, we have the same provider. Why can't I be on the same treatment? Just at that point, I knew if I didn't advocate for myself, nobody else was going to. And what switching from 3 pills to 1 pill a day did for me was gave me this, I could breathe. Like, all I had to do was think about it right before I went to bed, and everything was okay. And now there's this other advancement with taking an injectable, and I haven't worked myself up to that yet. I don't think I'll go to, but I'm naming that as a way that I relate to what Trey is saying about the agency of like, this is what I want, this is what I need to be healthy, and this is how I get to navigate in any relationships that I'm in the future. I get to let them know like it's not just about being safe, but it's also being healthy and knowing what my health profile looks like. Like, I'm on this treatment, so I'm not as of higher risk of other comorbidities because I've been on this treatment. So if I'm planning like a long life with someone, then they know like, okay, I don't have the risk of like high blood pressure or heart disease isn't as prevalent if she's been on her treatment, and things of that nature. So that also helps the other person be able to plan like what choices they need to make on prevention in case I did get sick and couldn't be on my treatment anymore, but we still wanted to be together. So it also opens a door for being able to communicate about your health with your partners.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm really sorry to hear about your husband, Kamari. I don't know how long ago that was, but just hearing your story.
Thank you.
I'm curious, what is one of the, I guess, because you're very vocal and you're very open about talking about your HIV status, and especially in a way to encourage other people and empower other people. What is one of the top questions you get from someone who maybe just recently got diagnosed and they're talking to you and they're learning about what your life's been like?
I get a lot of questions. I don't know about the top.
Like a most common question.
The most common question I do get is, how does your family treat you? Yeah, I get that question a lot because usually those interactions are happening because someone found out that I found out through giving birth. And my family and I were, we had our tussles in the beginning, but I was never not supported. My mother and I are very close. She was there the day I was diagnosed. That's a whole story on another podcast. But she
with mothers, right? It always is.
Yeah, she tapped into her spirituality and her faith. I remember her praying over me. I thought she was losing her mind because I thought I was dying. So I had that sort of support. I had the kind of nonchalant support of my grandmother. I lived with her and I came home and told her, and she was just like, she has a third grade education, but was brilliant. And I remember looking at her and I was so scared of her reaction because she was like my favorite human. And she's like, all right, knothead, I need you to go take out the trash. Like that was the end of the conversation.
Let's move on with life. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So when people ask me that, I sometimes feel guilty for having support because I know everyone doesn't get that. And I know that my circumstances are rare, specifically in like a Black community. Like I have friends who are like, I would kick my child out the house because I know I told them better. Like I've had people say this to me. So when people do ask me like, how does my family treat me? I let them know like there are some relatives who weren't as supportive, but they came around. When they saw I wasn't going to shut up about it, they were like, okay, Kamaria's living with HIV and she's okay. And so am I. So that's one of the top questions I get. And I know that comes from fear. And I don't know if my life would look different if I didn't have that support. I don't know if I'd be sitting here right now. So yeah. I always lean into like being grateful for that.
Absolutely. And Trey, I imagine like thoughts running through your mind about how much that plays a role in someone's acceptance and like able to process mentally and emotionally.
I was sitting here, I was thinking back on people I've worked with that didn't have that support. And I'm also thinking, like Michelle said, from like a behavioral health model, like way, just how much relief that must have been to have that support, to know that you're not carrying something alone. We as humans don't like to do things alone. We may like our alone time, but we don't like to do things alone. And having that also helps build where you have a space without stigma. You have a place of support, and I can imagine how helpful that is, because we all need that for every facet of our life, especially when we're going through times like getting a new diagnosis and kind of life is changing.
And I think that too, like, I think definitely there's a layer of it that is, like you mentioned, Trey, uncertainty and fear of like, what does this mean for me? Like, what's going to happen to me? But I think for most people, I mean, I would think most people, a lot of it is fear about what are other people going to think about me? What is my family going to think about me? How are my friends going to react? How's my partner going to react? Or, future partners going to react? And if we have that part, like, figured out, right? Like I can't, it's not the same thing, but I imagine that many people who have an unintended pregnancy at an early age go through a similar process, right? It's definitely not the same thing, but they get pregnant and they don't know who to tell, they don't know who they can count on, and then they hear a parent or a caregiver or a trusted family member say, it's okay, we got this. And then it's like all the fears, it's like you still have some uncertainty, right? And you still have that, but you're like, oh, I'm not alone. Like it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, And so I just want community members to listen to that and like understand if somebody comes to you and shares a diagnosis, shares like very personal information about something that's weighing on them, how they react and what comes next for them heavily depends on how you react in that moment and how you support them. And it could create a Kamaria who's like outgoing, positive, right? And like open and sure of herself and confident in herself. or someone who retreats and retracts and says, oh my gosh, like I feel shame, I feel judgment, I cannot live a full life now. So I think that's so important. Whew, that's heavy, y'all.
Yeah, it is. I just came back from Canada helping a coalition revamp some of their strategic planning around decriminalizing HIV in Canada. And in that, I was reminded of just the power of community, the power of asking hard questions, sitting at a table and talking about the differences between transformative or restorative justice and what is the right approach. What is the appropriate response to a public health issue? It's not supposed to be the carceral system. But aside from the systems, when it comes down to it, when I look up, no matter what the issue is, even beyond HIV, what's giving me hope is seeing people not back down, seeing people not shy away, seeing people, as Trey said, be curious of like, how did we get here? And to some folks, that may seem like a ridiculous question, like, haven't you been paying attention? But if people are vulnerable enough to ask the question of how we got here, then we need to be supportive enough to say, come have a seat and let me show you. And let me show you what we can do. We can either tap into some tactics that have already been tried and true in the past, or we can reinvent the wheel if we have the resources and the manpower. But either way, we're going to fight. And I think that's what keeps me going, is knowing that there's always a choice. We're never left without a choice. And to keep choosing ourselves and community is what gives me hope.
This is may sound a little cheesy, but I'm gonna say people like Amaria. They, as somebody who comes from a background of working in HIV organizations, um, and knowing how advocating, and people like Kamaria, and when the cuts in ADAP happened, shout out AIDS Healthcare Foundation. I know they did a lot of protesting. Um, there, I have a great connection there. I love AHF. But not only the ones in Florida that were affected, but people I know who mobilized in Alabama were also talking. People in Georgia, Mississippi. I saw people all across the country going, "Oh no, we can't. We're gonna have to do something about this. We've got to at least talk about this." And people who advocate for for the equity and the care really give me hope, because at one time there was such a shortage of people who would even say the words HIV or AIDS. I would say, a big resource, first and foremost, Planned Parenthood of Florida. We are affirming and informed care. I'm really with Kamara. Look at Pride and look at organizations in your area. I believe it's freehivtesting.org, where you can search it and they will tell you where testing is nearby for you. And for behavioral health, you can always look at, if you need immediate assistance, the Trevor Project 988 are always great resources. 211 to give you connections, but also looking up, one of the biggest ones is going and looking at Psychology Today to see if there's providers nearby, and you can even filter it based off preferences and need.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if I leave you all with one thing to do, to continue being able to learn about topics like these and help us combat stigma, help us empower our community, please subscribe to the podcast so we can continue to bring on amazing guests like Kamaria and Trey on to share their expertise and their experiences. Thank you both so much. I so appreciate it. It's such an important topic. And I really hope that people got a lot out of this conversation and at least have some resources and tools on how to navigate conversations and maybe even questions they might receive in their communities. So thank you both so much. I appreciate it, and happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride, and thank you.
Thank you.